afternoon. I'd like to welcome you to the CFA Diversity and Inclusion Lunch panel with our two guests to talk about recruiting challenges and solutions post-COVID-19. As you all know, COVID-19 has presented significant hiring challenges and at the same time opened up the conversation to employers evaluating new types of profiles for employees. We're joined today by two speakers, Addie Swartz, CEO of reacHIRE, and Linda Rossetti, serial entrepreneur and expert on transition, to discuss taking different approaches to creating a more inclusive work culture and demonstrate that the hiring process can be re-evaluated and improved. We're going to start with introductions before turning to our discussion, but I just want to remind everyone the event is being recorded and it will be available on YouTube after the event. If you have a question at any time, please use the chat box. We want to make this as interactive as possible, and I will be monitoring the chat box as we go along. And then there will also be structured time at the end for Q&A, but feel free to jump in if there's a specific question that you want to address in the moment. It'll be more fun and more interactive that way. So we will move to introductions. So I'm Eileen Dury. I'm co-chair of the CFA Boston Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, and excited to host our two panelists today. I'm going to start with Linda. Linda Rossetti is an experienced executive with expertise in individual and organizational transformation. She's worked in diverse environments, from venture-funded startups to global Fortune 100, including being the executive vice president and of administration at Iron Mountain, a $3.5 million global digital records management leader. She was also CEO at eMaven, a venture capital-backed company that was eventually acquired by Perot and now Dell EMC. For the past decade, Linda has led the Transition Institute. It's a consultancy focused on transformations for individuals and organizations, and she has done extensive work in the financial services industry. As part of her work, Linda has led groundbreaking research on transition. She also hosts the podcast Destination Unknown and currently works on research and collaborations with Simmons University on COVID-19 and the impact COVID has had on career aspirations. So welcome, Linda.
Thank you, Eileen. It's great to be here. Welcome, everyone. Happy lunchtime.
And Addie Swartz is focused on, excuse me one second while I make one shift here technically, focused on strengthening the talent pipeline for women leaders. So that women leaders are equally represented at all levels of the workforce. Addie is CEO of reacHIRE and works with Fortune 500 companies and talent innovators to drive higher engagement and lower attrition to improve gender diversity. reacHIRE's signature return to work programs enable companies like Fidelity, Wayfair, and T-Mobile to tap into a hidden talent pool, professionals returning to the workforce after a career break. The company's SaaS platform, Aurora, offers an innovative team-based approach to improving the engagement and retention of women currently in the workforce. Corporations that leverage this platform are able to put action behind their diversity and inclusion goals at scale, proactively, and supporting thousands of women at the same time in their organizations. So they don't have to leave the workforce in the first place. An accomplished executive, Addie was recently named to Inc. magazine's 2021 Female Founders list in the category Lifted Other Women Up. She started her career at Bain & Company, built new businesses with Disney, Reebok, and Lotus, and from there went to found 3 companies and designed all to empower women and girls. So welcome, Addie.
Thank you so much. Excited for this conversation today and be in the auspices of Linda and you, Eileen, as we talk about this important topic of employee recruiting in the world of work.
Yes. And so that's a great launching off point. So we'd like to turn to the discussion, get right into it. So in terms of the challenges posed by COVID-19, you know, we all know that there were significant hiring challenges posed by the pandemic. And in many ways, the pandemic just shined a light on a problem that existed prior. And now we're faced with, well, structurally what other solutions are there to these types of issues. And we know that there's been a structural demand supply imbalance post the pandemic, especially with filling roles. So one of the things we want to jump right into is talking about non-traditional talent, why we would consider looking in places that maybe we haven't looked in the past as employers. So, you know, what we've been doing hasn't been working globally. And I think we're really interested to learn from the both of you. So when I define non-traditional candidates for our group too, I just want to make sure they know what we're talking about. So non-traditional candidates are people who may not meet traditional job requirements when it comes to education and experience. Additionally, atypical candidates may have backgrounds in other fields or be career changers or returning to the workforce after some time away. They also may be self-taught, but the point is they're coming to us from places where we maybe haven't sourced before. And so Linda, I'd like to kick it off to you and talk about this structural imbalance. We know that there's more demand than supply right now for workers, especially in financial services post-pandemic. What are your thoughts about what companies can do to start to address the supply-demand imbalance and ways in which they can start to look in different places for talent?
Sure, Eileen, that's a big one to kick us off with, so thank you. And again, welcome everyone, happy lunchtime. To try to talk about this supply demand thing, I put it in two buckets, Eileen and Addie, and maybe this will resonate with you and our listeners, right? The first bucket is, you know, do we need to change who we hire? And the second is, do we need to change the terms of employment, you know, through which we'd be willing to, you know, basically have a relationship with an employee? And I think those two kind of address your supply demand area, right? So on the changing who we hire, you know, there's a fair amount that's happening under that. And by the way, there's multiple points of failure here. So I think that, you know, if you're looking for things that people can begin to talk about, I'll just mention a few now, and I know we'll go back to it, right? The first is, you know, getting the candidates, right? You know, which candidates are we willing to talk about? And you've already mentioned, Eileen, in your opening remarks that, you know, reorienting who can be a candidate, right? Addie and I have spent more than a decade, both of us, in this notion of people who have had interruptions in their career for whatever reason, you know, represent an enormous untapped talent pool. And trying to engage in conversations with them is an exciting and frankly essential conversation to have when we're trying to say, okay, in this notion of who we can hire, the first thing is getting candidates. Are there candidate pools we're overlooking? And right away that group comes to mind. And it you know, and we can talk a little bit more, Eileen, if you think it's useful, about, you know, applicant tracking systems and how those kind of work against us in trying to do it. But ultimately, getting the right candidate is only a part of this notion of attracting people to our organization, right? Part of it also relies on whether or not the people who are actually screening candidates are actually doing so effectively, right? And I'll tell you, you know, I'm an older person here, right? In 1985, I worked for the Bank of Boston, right? And we at that time went through something called targeted selection, where they made anyone who interviewed somebody go through a training course on how you actually do something other than hire yourself 10 years earlier, right? And that's something that corporations have gone in and out of for 30 years, investing in that kind of stuff. But nonetheless, it's essential, right? Training people on how to screen, particularly if you have candidates who are non-traditional. I think that was the word that you used, Eileen. And ultimately, the last thing I'll say under that bucket of who we're going to hire, we can't ignore job descriptions, right? I ran HR and administration for a large Fortune 500 company, right? We had 21,000 people all around the globe. And we had this very common virus, and that was, we always wrote job descriptions that were looking for a purple squirrel, which, by the way, don't exist on the planet, right? And so we would write these very tight dreamscape job descriptions, say, this is exactly who I need. And ultimately, we need to interrogate those at this moment, right? Because if the labor pool is changing, well, okay, we know we want a CFA who's done a ton of work in biotech. Okay, well, really, what does that mean? And how essential is that? Because could somebody else be just as effective? Maybe somebody who's looked at the pharma industry. I use that just as an illustration. So I'm longer than I want to, and I want Addie to get on this. But ultimately, when we think of supply and demand, the supply of candidates isn't just how many resumes we're getting submitted to the ATS, right? It's much more about who we're defining as the successful candidate, whether our leaders are ready to interview them, and whether we're being realistic when we describe who those people are that need to come in the door. And ultimately, then we can also talk about the terms of employment, Eileen, which is, well, can somebody be successful if they can't work, full time? And I have to say, I had this boss, when I ran, HR and administration for Iron Mountain, he thought he was the most progressive person on the planet. And he said, you can work any 60 hours you want. You can work at 2 a.m. You can work and he thought he was progressive. I'm like, wait a minute, dude, this is not the forefront of it. So, Eileen, I've talked way too long, but I think there are a lot of issues, both on the supply and demand side, which translate into a ton of things that people can leave this call and start doing, or at least advocate for within their organizations.
Thanks, Linda. So Addie, I'd love your response to that as well.
Well, I think that, what I've spent the better part of almost a decade committed to with reachHIRE is really the philosophy that a smart person can do almost any job. They just need the opportunity, they need the support, they need a little bit of guidance and some tools. And likely a manager that believes in them and gives them the room to grow. And so, this notion of putting, alternative, what is called alternative candidates, people that, haven't been in the industry, moving into an industry, people that have been out of the workforce for, 10 or 15 years, and then segueing them back into, even a similar industry that has new tools and different ways of thinking. Think about how marketing has significantly changed in the last 15 years. So when you think about recruiting and you think about talent, this is sort of the crux of it right now. The current number of open jobs is 10.4 million jobs in the US. That is a lot of jobs that are open. And as of last Friday, the Bureau of Labor Statistics showed that unemployment is at a new pandemic low of only 269,000 people that are raising their hands and saying that they're unemployed. So that means there are a lot of people that are sitting on the sidelines that are not deciding to engage right now. We know with, what's called the she-cession, that there's so many women that have raised their hands, fully capable, that says, hey, I need to take a break. And the pandemic has done that. As a society, if we're going to grow and our organizations are going to grow, we need to figure out ways of harnessing the talents that's there to really push it towards what we need. And that means being extremely open-minded and thinking differently about candidates. I had a conversation with somebody the other day, and it was about an employee, and they thought, wow, this person shouldn't be my boss because I have more credentials than they do. It's not a credential game anymore. It's not what school you went to, or if you have an advanced degree necessarily. It's, can you do the job? Can you grow and bring innovation and move the needle and profitability for an organization? So when I think about employee recruiting, and I think about the strides that we have all taken and how technology has played with the applicant tracking systems that Linda's talked about, we do know that the ATS systems are quite a negative for coming up with alternative diverse talent. And so one thing I just want to say is that we need to just think of people differently. We need to think about what skills they're bringing, what are transferable skills. And we do this every single day, and we've done this for almost a decade. 9 years Monday, doing this in terms of bringing women back to work, and some men now, but transitioning them and moving them in. And so, I think that this notion of where we are and how we need to be thinking differently, and thinking that, yes, the ATS systems are good, but are they limiting? And are they kind of keeping out the very people that would be the best people for those roles, and just thinking differently about how to evaluate talent, how to grow the talent, and how to make sure that you know, the employees are happy, satisfied, and able to, you know, go in the direction that they would like to take their careers.
And so I just have two follow-up questions, and we actually have a couple questions already from the chat box, which I anticipated. So Linda, maybe just quickly on your point about expanding the, you know, the job description, or not being so focused on have they done these 5 tasks before or have experience in these 5 areas. What specifically do you think companies could do to either skill up the interviewer or train differently in the interviewing process, or think about doing to enhance that process?
It's an interesting question, and I see it as 2 questions. I mean, one is how do you target greater pools, right? How can you say, oh, somebody who might not have been in our industry might be successful here? How do I find that person? And the second is, how do I allow my leaders, my managers, my interviewers to be successful in screening that person, right? The first is, you know, it happens in a conversation, right? It's your team, it's your colleagues who might be in HR and administration working with you, saying, okay, who is it you need to hire? And by the way, that sounds like such a simple conversation, but that is a critical conversation. And because ultimately that conversation, somebody's sitting there saying, oh my goodness, Eileen, you're a genius. Let me just write that down. And then they go and they use that word in the job description. And oh, by the way, that's the word they use when they screen the applicant tracking system, ATS, when they screen the resumes, right? So it's as simple as having a conversation saying, what is success here really? Is it that they need to know this industry? Is it that they need to be an experienced project manager who can deal with complex issues? Is it that they need, right? And those questions are not necessarily easy to answer, because remember, a lot of these companies, it will be the first time. So they'll be like, well, I think so. And there'll be people in the room who will say, oh, no, that will never work. So I think ultimately that it is exploring through conversation of what are the success criteria for the role. And then ultimately it is making sure that before, you know, your managers interview those people, that they are briefed on those conversations that occurred that said, you know, hey, we decided to kind of put on a secondary tier an industry perspective. And we agreed that we're really looking for somebody who has had, you know, project management experience or customer interactions, or you name it, whatever the select list are. So Eileen, I hope that answers your question, but there were 2, you know, immediate conversations, then train people or make them aware of the criteria. And ideally, in the best companies, those interviewers are handed a sheet that says, here are the criteria we're screening for. And I don't want to say it's a tick the box kind of thing, but they can ask questions that say, hey, you know, can you tell me about a point when you had a project that went off the rails? What did you do? And it's less about tell me the 6 companies that exist in this subcategory in this industry. And it's more about a competency that we can see is present or absent in this person's work experience. And again, the best companies are using those bingo cards. I mean, they're related to in so many different ways, but they're handing an interviewer not just kind of interview, it's these are the things we want you to screen for.
Excellent.
I just want to build on that for a second, if that's okay, Eileen. Just because I thought Linda hits a couple of points there. One is, and again, one more push on the applicant tracking systems, which, you know, obviously make the world more efficient for companies if they have hundreds and thousands of applicants that are applying to the very many open jobs they have. But, you know, it is clear, and we know that the ATS systems overlook millions of qualified candidates and diverse candidates too. What we say at reachHIRE is a career break doesn't have to be a career breaker. I mean, people take time off, people do different things. Every ATS system's like, if you have a break, there's something wrong and you will never get it past that proverbial technology, you know, garbage bin. So I think that, you know, just thinking that way, I also think that, you know, panel interviews so that people from different perspectives are interviewing people and not just the hiring manager, so that if you know what certain sets of qualifications you're looking for, we'll do that. Having programs, honestly, like a returnship program where you have 6 months to learn the culture, learn the organization, and you're kind of getting an on-ramp so that, you know, you can build your skills in the job as you are doing a job. That is a way, and doing it in a programmatic way where you're not feeling alone. You're in a cohort and you're learning and you're connecting with other people at the same time. It's not just about everyone today wants diversity. Everyone wants, you know, talent, but I feel like that, you know, where we are right now with the millions of open jobs and, you know, everyone talking about the great resignation, which we're seeing all over, that people are looking for companies that they want to join with purpose. And what do companies need? Okay, so I'm an employer, and, you know, as an employer, what am I looking for? It is kind of a power shift. There's a yin and a yang, you know, and the power shift for the employer is they want creative, empowered people that will be motivated to do their jobs and to create value for the organization. That's what makes an organization successful, innovative, and profitable. You know, the employee, what are they looking for? They're looking for a sense of purpose, a place where they feel a sense of belonging. You can like recruit all day long for alternative talent and bring them in the door. And guess what? A year later, they might have left because they didn't feel that there was a sense of place there. So I feel like this, you know, as we think about employee recruiting, it's not only like, you know, the job descriptions and the ATS systems and the systematic processes that bring people into an organization. It's that once you have them, how do you ensure that they stay there, that they are able to contribute and grow and be happy? And I think that's what all of us have to think about as we think about our company values, how we treat our employees, and again, that power shift where, you know, the employee with 10 million jobs open has a lot of power to say, you know, you're not helping me, you're not providing enough flexibility, or you're not providing me, you know, the childcare that I need, or any other number of things to do that. So I think that recruiting has to have a focus on retention and looking at alternative ways in terms of, you know, groups, support, you know, walking alongside people, which is what, you know, reachHIRE does programmatically with their returners. All those things contribute significantly.
Thank you, Addie. So I want to move on to our next panel question, but we did get in a chat question that I want to try and answer relevant to this topic. So it's from a participant who's at a traditional asset manager who has hired mid-career professionals that have already done the job, or taken in junior people and grown them into the role that they, you know, are seeking to ultimately fill. This person would love to recruit from a non-traditional candidate pool. Can you make specific suggestions as to how we can think differently? Linda, you addressed this a little bit with the walk around and get the elements of the job that would make the person successful and embed that into your interviewing process. But is there anything else the two of you can answer in a way that would offer something more tangible to help think differently? I think we all recognize this is about thinking differently first and foremost.
The best I'll offer, and then I'll hand it to Addie, is to have a conversation about adjacencies, right? And by adjacencies, I mean, you sit there and you think about the job and you think about what types of jobs are adjacent to that one, meaning they have commonalities and skill or dimensions that are relevant, right? So you might say, okay, XYZ job at the asset manager, boy, there's somebody at, the program leader at Harvard University could do that job. You have a structured conversation about adjacencies and recognize again, which are the skill sets that you think might be present in other jobs, right? A woman who used to work with me for many years is now the head of people at Dropbox, right? And they've had a heck of a time getting engineers. And ultimately what they've had to do is they've deconstructed a lot of jobs into coding, but also kind of program management, and they've gone and they've looked at other adjacent industries where they could say, well, where are either of those talents? And so, it sounds like an amorphous thing, but ultimately it is the beginning of the conversation that says, oh yeah, we hire from higher ed, we hire from biotech, and by the way, we're an asset management organization, right? So I think it is trying to define those adjacencies and having a conversation about that. That's how I'd start the conversation. What about you, Addie?
Yeah, I mean, I think your points are so on, Linda, fantastic. I mean, because the way we have our program on the return side, that, you have a 6 months of an on-ramp, and it's almost like a test drive. The individual takes the test drive and the company takes the test drive. And honestly, the hiring manager takes the test drive too. It allows for, room to be flexible, to be agile, to be like looking at candidates more openly and not saying they have to have these 10 things in order to come in here, because it feels a little less like there's less of a commitment. So it's more of a test. It's like, okay, we'll try you out. You'll try us out. We'll see if this works. So we've been able to really kind of be very transformative in taking people in certain industries, transferring them or transforming them into other industries, other jobs that are exactly what Linda said, in kind of with adjacent skills, from like pharmaceutical sales to talent acquisition and finance, and project management, coming from one industry to completely different industry. Smart people can learn different skills. You just need to give them the time, the space, not as much pressure, and the support. And I feel like that when you do that and you bring people in groups and they feel a sense of community with each other, that can make a difference. And when you think about when you went to college, when maybe you went to got some kind of other degree, you belong to, some community organization or a church or a synagogue, like, when you form a group, you feel connected. And I think that the goal is to get great people who are bright and motivated. Do you know that we have a statistic that I'm so proud of? Our statistic is that if somebody ends up landing a job at the end of their experience, at the end of their returnship, 3 years later, 93% of them are still at the company in that organization. That means that they got the community, the sense of belonging, and they had the time to be able to retrofit themselves with new skills and new jobs. And when we go through our program and we have a kickoff, an onboarding, and then a graduation at the end, 6 months later, the amount of skills that people have picked up, technological skills and tools that they never knew about. They could have been out of the workforce 5 years, 10 years, 18 years, and they are smart people that are able to do different things. So, age bias has to go away, and thinking differently and giving people the community, the space, and the support, I think will make the difference for many more people to feel a sense of belonging and feel satisfied in their organization.
I completely agree with what Addie said. I do want to just make one point, though. I don't want people to hear this to say, oh, the only way adjacencies can be successful is if we have a whole program, right? It's lovely when companies can invest in programs like reacHIRE. I'm very, very close to the company and a big fan, and have seen it just contribute enormously within companies. But I don't want our participants today to read that, oh, if I can't afford, or if I'm not hiring enough people to say put a whole program in place, this won't be successful. And I think it can be, right? To define an adjacency, to have access to an alternate talent pool, is going to put stress on your system in terms of making sure your interviewers can screen successfully for these people, and also onboarding and getting them up to speed. And those are things that we can be thoughtful about. But ultimately, I referenced my friend who's the head of HR, right, Chief People Officer of Dropbox. She was a finance person when she walked into my office, and we we said, sure, come on board. You can come into a different place in the company. And that was a real switch. And I think ultimately that's what Addie and I are both saying, which is if we're going to address the talent gap right now, we as employers, we as hiring people are going to need to be much better at recognizing capacity or competency and playing them into new seats. And that's going to be a very important part.
Yeah, thank you, Linda, for the clarification. And I want to follow up on a point that you both just made, and shift the conversation a little bit to the sense of belonging you both alluded to. Linda, in a lot of your prior research and work, you talked about how successful people who successfully transition find something that has meaning and value to them. And, you know, Addie was echoing that and using different words, where if they belong or there's a group that they can join, they're much more likely to stay and be successful for themselves and in the role of the company. Now that we are onboarding people in this virtual hybrid world, some are in person, some are not, is there a new type of scaffolding required for you know, the hiring managers? And if so, do you have thoughts on techniques that our participants could start to embed into their process? Because this is new for all of us, but I think we all recognize that sense of belonging is critical to the success of the candidate.
Sure, and thank you. And yeah, there's lots. And again, it's hard to say what the right piece is, but I think there are some critical essential pieces that need to be a part of any kind of onboarding, right? First of all, there needs to be onboarding, right? And that can happen digitally, right? We can get somebody on a Zoom call or have them watch videos and do all sorts of things. But if it isn't communicating the values of the organization, right, that there's some connective tissue that people can understand their why within the greater whole, it will fail, right? So, and to some organizations, that's, oh yeah, we do onboarding their first day, they listen to the CEO and they do a video, whatever it is. So it can express itself in many ways. It can absolutely happen remotely, but it has to have the values of the organization have to be baked in that, and that has to be communicated. But onboarding isn't an event, right? It's an evolution, and you know, it's part of a relationship with an employee. I kind of say it's the first 100 days, right? Onboarding. And the other essential requirements, other than making sure the values of the organization are part of the conversation, is kind of the support structure you're putting in place with someone. And because it's remote, you know, we have seen organizations do kind of a buddy system. And it isn't like, oh, here's my mentor, Addie's going to be my mentor. She's, you know, she's the CEO and I get to hang with her once a quarter. The buddy system is much more informal, which is, you know, it could be a 10-minute coffee by Zoom a couple days a week for a new employee, you know, so there's kind of an informal kind of structure that kind of gets next to this person and walks with them, so that as they're getting familiar with their boss, their team meetings, other members on the team, they have somebody next to them that isn't anywhere close to an evaluative role in any way, but they're there for them. And so I think those are two ideas, Eileen, that right off the bat, they need to be there. And I know Addie has more she could add here.
Yeah. So I definitely agree with you, Linda. I do think that we are in a new world. We're in a world where Zoom is here to stay. And, I think we're never going to have another meeting where everybody shows up in person. There's never going to be a scenario like that. I know the pandemic kind of opened up opportunity for employers to hire people from all over the country, not just within a 50-mile radius. And maybe not every employer did that, but I know a lot of employers did. And so by hiring, like kind of taking away that, that forced, fence in a way of having to hire people within a certain radius, you open up the world really, or at least the better parts of the whole, United States, if you're an American company, to hiring different kinds of people with different skills that can take you in different directions. I know even, our company hired, we have somebody in Kentucky and somebody in Austin, Texas, and someone in California, and in addition to the surrounding New England areas that where we're based. So I do think that the world has changed and shifted, and I do believe that we need new tools. In fact, we did develop a new tool because we felt it's so critical to provide more support and community. When you think about what companies do now and what has been, I think, very successful, for what it has been invested in is the ERG, the Employee Resource Group. That has been powerful. Companies have adopted that. There are very many different flavors of employee resource groups to build that community and connection. But is that enough? And I believe it isn't. I believe that you need to create those small groups, that intimate, safe space to have conversations, the ability to figure out how to navigate from one place to another. And personally, for women, I think it's even more critical. And that's what we've seen with the pandemic. I do want to say that we developed this SaaS platform called Aurora that does just that. And a lot of companies that have a predominance of men and less women, and noticing that the women are not moving up the pipeline in the same way, the famous McKinsey broken rung, have adopted Aurora and have really seen like the shift in how the women are able to do a better job of getting those opportunities and growing within the organization, all because their organization recognized this need. So I do think that companies need other tools. And I do think that people in general, women and men, everyone, underrepresented groups specifically, need ways to show up and get that sense of belonging. And we as organizations need to create that. Otherwise, we won't have the employees that we want and need.
I love it. And, this belonging, Addie's so right on that, that we can have the simulated pizza party remotely. We can do that, right? I can have Pizza Hut deliver a pizza to every employee, no matter where they are. And we can all get on Zoom and have an event, and we can, have a quasi team lunch. But if we don't have the structural commitment to belonging and figuring out how that's going to happen, Pizza Hut can deliver pizzas all day long and it won't do anything. So, I think, Eileen, there's really two elements here that are necessary. And I don't want to take away the pizza deliverer, because it actually is very important. And, I remember giving my sister, who works for the American Red Cross, a really hard time, because early in the pandemic, they had their boss is kind of kooky, and they had Krispy Kreme donuts and a cup of coffee delivered to all their people, around the country. It was an extraordinary expense. I'm like, what are you doing? That's crazy. And ultimately now I think, those kind of things are essential, in addition to the structural things that we can do to make sure that employees feel a sense of belonging, because, ultimately employees come through the door with enormous capacity. Shame on us if we can't figure out how to mobilize that, because my suspicion is we're probably mobilizing a very small portion of it today.
What I'm hearing, just before we move on to the last major topic, is, we're investing, we're spending time trying to find candidates who might be what we call non-traditional. And not only are we investing on the upfront in terms of finding the discovery of these candidates, but we need to also be investing in the retention. And I think that it's an investment of time, but also energy, and then commitment from the top. To see it all the way through. And I'm hearing that through your answers.
I do think, Eileen, too, that it's, replenishing the pipeline with great talent is one thing. And clearly we spend a lot of time thinking about that, but growing the people in your organization so that it's all about, retention. And that goes back to the first thing of what can you do? Well, a lot of recruiters in organizations are bonused by time to fill. How quickly can you fill this job? But they're not bonused by the people you filled. Are they there a year or two later, or 3 years later? And I think that at the end of the day, if you're really going to build a strong organization where people are committed to the company's purpose and mission, you'll want those people to bring their knowledge and their, special treasures and stay and continue to grow and develop.
And I just want to build on that, because I think that it's totally right on. But I think that, what I'm seeing in some of the companies that we work with is that people are trying to figure out how to alter what work means. And I don't mean to be silly about it. It is, does that mean, because I hear in Addie's work, it's like, okay, an employee, that's a full-time employee. And I think that that's where we're seeing companies really struggle right now, which is, how do I operationalize less than full-time? Like, I mean, we kind of struggle to have part-time. And if you ask, I'm 57, if you ask any women of my generation whether or not we ever actually got part-time right, we would all say no. And it's not just a women thing, it's for men too, but we've never really been able to do that. So how do you operationalize commitments from employees that may not look like 40 hours, 5 days a week? It might look like something else. And I think we've really struggled with that. And I think talent now in the next, right, if I'm an asset manager and I say, okay, what's my talent going to be like in the next decade? Trying to get our arms around what that means, that a capacity that is maybe shared from an employee to the employer in 30 hours a week or 25. And what does that mean? And what does that mean for our relationship, right? If I have an employee who perhaps early on in his career, he comes in and he does full-time, but for real reasons, he has to go back to 20 hours a week. And then at some other time in his career, he might go to 35 hours a week. Right? We have to, as employers, begin to have the conversation of the relationship with the employee is no longer binary. It's not, I'm a full-time employee or I'm not. That binary nature is out the door. And it's in the next 5 to 10 years, and maybe even more accelerated because of the pandemic, we need to all be having those conversations.
I already see a lot of that now in the organizations that we work with, because there's the gig economy and it's alive and well and kicking, and people are not thinking necessarily that they're going to work for the same company for 30 years, and they're putting out their own shingle, and honestly, you see it's just pretty easy to go and kind of do your own thing, not necessarily in more traditional or industries as much. But I think, to your point, Linda, it's extremely important to think about, oh my God, I found this person. Guess what? They can't work this job exactly, but could they work it sort of? Could we get some of it? And could we get their talents to come in? And honestly, I've hired the best people into my organization at reacHIRE, because I was willing to say, okay, right now, I understand your personal life situation. Give me X. Let's change your job to Y right now while you figure out what you need to. And that's what powers great organizations, getting the best talent you can. And in this world, under other people's terms, not necessarily the company's terms, but making that work. So I think, Linda, your point of, it doesn't have to be full-time necessarily. And certain jobs maybe have to be, but also assuming that everybody wants to move up the corporate ladder, that's kind of a misnomer. I think there's a lot of people that maybe not necessarily want to do that. We're seeing lots of people in this, great resignation that are leaving higher paid jobs for jobs that are like in the nonprofit world, where they're making less, but they feel more mission driven, or they feel that they have more flexibility. So the world has been turned upside down for employers. And I think that employers just need to be proactive and think about, what's the most important thing? Getting the best people. How do I do that? Not necessarily by specific requests that fill a specific job description, not necessarily relying on technology like an applicant tracking system and just pick the people before you've even had a chance to even be more open-mindedly and pick them, and then not be so biased by age or background, or you have to have these degrees, because otherwise you're not going to be a good worker and a good learner.
So I want to keep my eye on the clock here and make sure that we have time for questions and answers. But for each of you, and I have a question here too, if there's one action item you could recommend over the next year that employers could take in regards to thinking differently, recruiting post-COVID, what would it be? And I'd like to make sure we have at least 10 minutes for questions.
It's simple from my perspective. It is making sure that you train your interviewers and your HR staff who are screening resumes to open their hearts to interrupted work experience. right? It's one thing, right? Because you will unlock access to extraordinary talent, right? I had a conversation with the dean of the Harvard Business School in the last couple of weeks about the underemployment issue, right? We have millions and millions of people who are highly skilled, highly educated, experienced, who are sitting on the sidelines. So that would, if I could do one thing and task everyone, and it isn't so easy. It isn't just, oh, I'm going to switch this criteria on the applicant tracking system. It takes a couple of conversations to make it work, Eileen, but I think you can do it really well and it would have huge impacts.
Agreed. Addie?
I guess I would say that I would kind of build on what Linda said and say, you know, having a career break of any kind because of illness, because of family, because of personal, should not be a career breaker. We need the talent, we need the people, we need to give them on-ramps. So that's one thing. The other thing that I so firmly believe, and I believe it for everybody in my organization and in every organization that we work in, is sense of belonging. You have to focus on how you let people feel like they are able to contribute, that their voice is important, that if they aren't in a job that they're excelling in, that you work to figure out a job where they can excel. And in a big enough organization with so many open jobs, there are a lot of things. I'm seeing something about blind resumes. Clearly, all that research that was done on the blind resumes where you take the names off, I think Stanford did a very famous study on that, where they kind of they changed the names from a man to a woman, and the man got the interview and the woman didn't, just by changing the name from, I think, from Henry to like Harriet or something. So, I mean, that's like old research that proves a point. The data from McKinsey shows that 51% of people leave jobs because they don't belong. And so recruiting has to have an element of retention. And that if you don't think about retention when you're recruiting, you're always going to be recruiting. And I see this in companies over and over again. It's all about filling the jobs, filling the jobs, filling the jobs. It's also about keeping the people.
Yep. Those are all both excellent points. So in terms of Q&A, I want to follow up on that blind resume point. And what I'm hearing is trying to eliminate bias through the process too, right? And I will pose this question, like, are there other tactical points that you know of that employers could implement this coming year to help eliminate bias? Would it be, blocking out dates? I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there for people who've had a break. But what have you both experienced that could maybe be another tactical solution to trying to root out some of the bias that exists?
A couple of things I would say right off the top. First of all, you have to train the people who are sitting in a seat as an interviewer. And that's, you can execute that in a lot of ways, but you can't get around it, right? You have to really make those people aware of how they might have implicit bias they're not even sure they're expressing. The second thing is I would begin to have relationships with organizations that can, help you succeed, which is, whether it's a local college's alumni association, whatever it is, to get you access to candidates who actually are perhaps non-traditional in your definition of the word, and help you get candidates in the door that actually perhaps wouldn't otherwise be there because of the bias that's in your process. So, I think right off the top of my head, and with 5 more minutes, we could come up with more, but those are my first 2. Addie, what about you?
So I think you should look at people for the skills that they can grow into, not just the skills that they have, and really assess people by appetite to learn. We talk about lifelong learning, that's like a key word, but like really somebody who's going to go in a job and say, no one told me, but I know I need to learn these 3 new technologies in the next 6 months, so I'm going to do that. So having this, interest and openness to continue learning and not being afraid, even if you feel like your skills are currently at a deficit. That's kind of like, that to me is somebody who's could be a really key employee. We've placed over 250 women back at Fidelity, okay, in all kinds of flavors of jobs. That's a commitment to diversity. The last few cohorts we've had, over 50% of the people are people of color. They're coming into jobs where the jobs aren't totally specced out. They're trying it for 6 months and it's working. We do that at Wayfair, T-Mobile, a cybersecurity firm, all different kinds of skills, all kinds of jobs. It's an openness to look at talent differently, and knowing that maybe you hire somebody and they're not perfect for that exact job, but if they're perfect for the company and they, have a fit with the culture, they could be a good long-term employee.
Eileen, I know you want to move on, but I just want to add one little teeny tidbit to that is hiring these great people isn't going to happen just because you will it to be so. You cannot, I don't think, step around this notion of objectively assessing the criteria you're looking for a candidate, right? So it isn't, oh, I liked her, I didn't. It's like, okay, wait a minute. She had 3 examples of great projects that she managed and led to profitability. Okay, yes, she gets in, right? So I think that, ultimately coming up with objective criteria of what success looks like is also something you can do tomorrow if your group is hiring people. And, you should have those conversations before any candidate comes through the door, because then you can take away some, not all, of the bias, because people aren't just looking for themselves 15 years younger.
Yeah,
and I do just want to say one more thing on that, is that digging deep behind the resume, which is what Linda was intimating, is it's not just about a bullet point and, you move the needle by, 57%. It's like, what did you do? How did you do it? What made you successful? Why on a project were you not successful? Learning about how somebody navigates and solves problems is far more important to their future job than whatever it is that they did. So using and digging deep into those examples, whether it be a recent example or something where they might have been out of work for a while, but solved another problem for their community. Those are the kinds of things that really show capability and demonstrate like innovative thinking and desire and intent.
And we just have some Q&A I want to try to get to for the end of the time period. So we have another question was, I think, for firms or people who have not connected with people in your roles, right, or at reacHIRE, and or Linda, familiar with your work, how do I do that? I would say, just before I turn it to the two, being on the panel right now here today is a great first step, learning about ways in which our industry is working with, firms like yours, and trying to expand the aperture of what firms are doing at Fidelity and some others. And I think reaching out to, maybe my own personal experience is reaching out to diverse candidates that you might know and say, how did you get connected? Or what was your journey like? Maybe not putting them on the spot of how do you get connected, but trying to have some more individual conversations just so that we all start participating in a way that's more meaningful, and bringing that back to our organizations will help all of us learn. So let me kick it over to our panelists and just say, how can people that aren't as connected get to know the two of you and the work you're doing and the work in the field?
Sure. So my organization, the Transition Institute, is an easy way to get started, and you can find all my work at lindarossetti.com. But I think ultimately each of us, right, everyone on this call can be a part of initiating conversations with others, and that's how we learn about this. So in your organizations, when people are asking, hey, what are we going to put on the agenda for the next quarterly meeting, or what are we going to put on the agenda for the annual meeting with employees, get your hand in the air and say, I think we should talk about accommodating new candidate pools, and how can we do that, right? So make it real by making it part of the conversation, and all of us can do that. And ultimately, to the extent that you're part of professional organizations, like the organizations we're here today, right? Make it a part of those organizations' conversations too, because, ultimately my work, Addie's work, we're published, we're active in the community, but ultimately those things have to come into the conversations that you're all having every day. So I can't encourage you enough to do that.
And in terms of learning more about, what reachHIRE does. We have our website, reachHIRE.com with one H, where you can learn a little bit more about our return programs and the Aurora platform. And I am happy to come and talk to any organization that wants to learn a little bit more about what we do. We have a team of people that are really dedicated and extremely passionate about making change happen for the organizations and for the people in those that want to go back to work and to provide that on-ramp. You know, in relation to Aurora, we've had some great success. Actually, we were working with Analog Devices, and they were just listed as one of the best places, the 100 best places in Forbes for women to work. And you know, I'm proud to have been a part of. I'm proud. My old company is proud of being a part of, you know, Aurora being a part of their Elevate program that really helps more women grow. And the list goes on and on. You know, we're proud of our partnerships. We're proud to shout their innovative thinking about candidates through the rooftops. And it's working. It is working. It does take some care and intention, but doesn't everything. So I think that, and there are many ways to skin the cat. So, but please reach out via, you know, our website, and happy to provide more information on what we do.
I want to see if there's any last few questions here, but I'd like to wrap it up. And if there's any additional questions, we can get back to you over email. But I want to thank our panelists, Addie and Linda, for bringing, you know, your many years of experience and your individual journeys in this area. You both have different vantage points, but offers, you know, tangible, tactical things that we can all use day to day on our own journeys and help us continue to learn. So I just want to thank you both for being willing to discuss the topic. And as you said, it's an evolving topic. So hopefully we'll be able to do another iteration of this. And I know we could have talked for a long time, but I want to just thank you both again for the value that you've brought to the conversation today and to the society.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Eileen, for having me and Linda. And I just want to go back to a point Linda said earlier on in the conversation about defining success. What is success? And as we think about, you know, defining success and building a diverse workforce, I think it's all about getting people to contribute, feeling satisfied, and feeling a sense of belonging and getting workplace satisfaction. And when we are able to do that, we will have teams of people that are contributing, and our organizations will continue to grow and thrive.
Well, it's been a pleasure, Addie. That's a tough one to follow because I think I would put success a little simpler, but you know, a little tougher to achieve, which is I think success is going to be when we actually have an inclusive workforce, and inclusivity is going to be defined in very individual terms because it's different for all of us. So Eileen, thank you for hosting, and to the CFA Society, thank you for having us. Addie, it's always a pleasure. But we wish you all very, very good luck on this. You know, the employment situation is going to continue to be dynamic. And for organizations that aren't paying attention to it right now, it's only going to accelerate in its importance. So be the cheerleader inside your organization, take up the charge, because this is one that's going to be a really important conversation. So again, thanks for making it be important today at lunchtime. And it's been a real delight.
Great. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.